I want to sort of begin by welcoming everyone. Hi there. My name is Joseph Campana. I'm a professor of English here at Rice University, and I direct the Center for Environmental Studies, and I co-direct with Richard Johnson our Environmental Studies curriculum. And I am delighted to be here today for a webinar with Marco Armicro, whose work I've admired for a long time. I'm so glad to finally get to meet you. I had an experience, we'll be talking a lot about waste and other things today, a few years back teaching a kind of multidisciplinary grad seminar on waste with students from also interested in a wide range of time periods. It's one of the most fascinating, important topics to be talking about, something that stretches very far in our history, but that also very much presses on any idea we have of the future. So I'm so grateful to have Professor Armicro here with us today. I want to introduce quickly two of my colleagues who will be in the conversation today and then move on. First, I want to introduce Professor Gisela Heffes, my colleague who has arranged this event. Thanks to Gisela for that. She's a professor in the Department of Modern and Classical Literatures and Cultures with a specialization in Latin American studies, and particularly an important figure in Latin American eco-criticism. I want to say quickly of her many, many accomplishments that I don't have time to talk about. Unfortunately, I just want to say she is also the co-president of ASLI, the Association for the Study of Literature and the Environment, and has been working on wonderful programming there. And in fact, working with our center on a number of initiatives. And I will put some links in the chat when I get done in a second. But I'm grateful to Gisela for creating out of our sort of Planet Now sort of conversations, virtual conversations and some live, a kind of set of conversations called Planeta Herido, which are Spanish language conversations. And they range from literary artists to broader conversations about new directions in Latin American eco-criticism in conversation with the University of Bristol and other partners. So I'm deeply grateful to Gisela for everything she brings to and builds at our center, including today's conversation. And then the other person on the screen that you see is Weston Twardowski, who is the project manager for the Mellon Foundation funded Diluvial Houston Initiative. He's an expert in theater and interdisciplinary theater with his work in environmental justice, arts and community engagement, with particular attention to post-Katrina New Orleans. So thanks to Weston for all that he's done to set up the webinar, and he'll be in conversation with us later. Let me now just pass the baton over to Gisela.
Thank you, Joe. I am very, very honored today to introduce our guest for the Planet Now series. Professor Marco Armicro is Icrea Research Professor at the Institute for the History of Science at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. Since 2019, Marco has been the elected president of the European Society for Environmental History. Marco was postdoc and visiting scholar at the program in Agrarian Studies at Yale University, University of California, Berkeley, Stanford University, and University of Coimbra in Portugal. For 10 years, he was the director of the Environmental Humanities Lab or Laboratory at the Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden. With his research, Marco has contributed to bridge environmental humanities and political ecology. It's a tremendous pleasure and honor to have you here. Marco, thank you so much for accepting our invitation, and I'm going to let you talk about your book and anything that you want to talk about the Wasteocene.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gisela, for this fantastic introduction. And thank you, Joseph, thank you, Weston, and many thanks to the Planet Now series at Rice University for inviting me. I am starting my timer, so I will not over speak as always. And maybe I should also share my screen. Let's see if I can do this. I hope that you can see it, right? Okay. No, sorry, I am going. So very good. So my idea was, Gisela, I hope that you agree with me. But I am telling you now, you cannot disagree. Unfortunately, not now, at least it's too late. My idea is, instead of talking really closely to the book, because in the end the book is there, I am talking a little bit around the book. Let's see what can happen in this way. Okay, just to be on time, I have a script here that I will follow. Okay, respiratory failure due to COVID-19, no prior illness. The patient was in England in early March. He had high fever and a lot of coughing. He cannot breathe and has tachypnea with a rate of less than 40 per minute. And sorry, I was going to keep this a little bit closer. So 40 per minute and a continuous need for oxygen. The patient needs to be intubated. The tube is in position 24 centimeter, verified with capnography and CVK in the artery. The patient has a temperature of 35 and needs blankets and blankets. Is taking norepinephrine. Sometimes the pressure plummets, but then rises spontaneously. Occasionally opens eyes, grasps hands, and asks for sleep. The patient lost 1 kilogram in one day. He vomited in the evening. We increased the propofol, but the patient is very scared, started coughing, and tried to sit up in bed to vomit. The situation is critical. Call the family. From my hospital diary in intensive care, March 2020. Because the Wasteocene, the age of waste, is never impersonal. It's not like the Anthropocene, the geological age of humans, stuff that you read about in books, that the scientist in TV explains to you. The Wasteocene mixes with our body. You breathe it into the air. Often you start ingesting it as early as breast milk. The Wasteocene enters homes, kitchens, and bedrooms. Of course, the homes of those who have homes. I wrote this book, and you can see here the cover of the English version, which was the original version, and then you see the Spanish translation, Wasteocene, l'era dei scarti in Italia, and then I don't have the cover, but the book has been translated in Chinese and in Brazil. The book will be out very soon. So I wrote this book during my long convalescence. I became seriously ill with COVID-19. I almost died. I said goodbye to my family over the phone because according to the doctors, I was in danger of not surviving the night. Why share with you, with strangers here, whatever here means in this digital world, my illness, my hospital diary? Well, a little bit to be less of a stranger, to get to know each other, apart from the official introductions, titles, assignments, job positions, etc. As a scholar, I have always been told I am a strange subject. I think that I study and I write. I think that what I study and what I write has something to do with the personal, with my biography, my history. I wrote this book when I came out of the hospital after a month with 15 kilograms less, a strange voice coming from the intubation, and strange monsters that show up every time night fell and darkness brought me back to the coma in the ICU. How can I tell you about this book without telling you all this? I am not a private person, as you might guess. You can find these things in the book as well. My life is intermingled in the pages of the book. The disease peeps through the toxic waste data and the Agloboshi landfill in Ghana. A primary school friend resurfaces among the cardboards standing in the poor nights of the 1970s Naples in Italy to end up asleep in the class where I was also condemned to be the best because, as my mother used to say, for those like us with no saints in heaven, it is not enough to be good. You have to be the best. You must be the best. All this is in the book. There are fragments of my life mixed with the history of my city and the history of the Wasteocene. That is the era of waste, which I want to tell you about today, because the Wasteocene, the age of waste, is never impersonal. It is not like the Anthropocene, the geological age of humans, stuff that you read about in books, that the scientists in TV explain to you. The Wasteocene mixes with your body. You breathe it into the air. Often you start ingesting it as early as breast milk. The Wasteocene enters homes, kitchens, and bedrooms. Of course, the homes of those who have homes. Everybody is digging, some for one reason and some for other reasons. BP, which would be British Petroleum, but now calls itself Beyond Petroleum, digs very deep wells, even in the sea, in search of oil, precisely. Gabriel Resources digs in the Pink Mountains of Romania for gold. They dig up the mountains of the Susa Valley to run the high-speed train in Italy, the progress that runs as fast as an useless train, as useless progress. Geologists dig to find out if we have finally entered the Anthropocene, the age of humans, and where the unmistakable sign of our power as a species lies. It seems to be in the 1940s and 1950s, when the nuclear powers left their atomic signature written in the geosphere. But maybe this sign was with the Industrial Revolution, the capitalist revolution, the one without guillotines and Soviets, just so much poison, war, and misery. That, yes, a clean revolution, where you die without ever being killed. You fail in war, you fail on the job, you are the victim of a terrible accident. Capitalism never kills. It knows how to behave well in society. And if one dies of capitalism, well, it means that she was not fit for it. What would you see? What would you see if you could dig into the people's bodies? What layers would come out? I imagine in the body of a worker, a factory worker, we would find traces of the asbestocene, and then traces of the CVMocene, vinyl chloride monomer, or the PVCocene. For miners, we will find the silicocene. For agricultural workers, the glyphosatocene. For all and every subaltern, the Wasteocene, the era in which capitalism produces people and communities to be thrown away, to be discarded, to be worthless once every last drop of value has been extracted from them. When I speak of wasted communities, I mean multi-species communities, where humans and other animals, plants, soil, cultures, everything is turned first into a mine to be exploited, and then into a dump. Words are powerful. Anthropocene sounds so neutral, scientific, clean. You say Anthropocene, and you already feel like a scientist. So instead, we have to come up with new words that reveal and not hide. Capitalocene is one of such words, important, powerful words. It says that it's not a we, the human species, that has caused this planetary mess, but an economic system based on exploitation. The Plantationocene is also powerful. It tells us that the current ecological crisis originates in the plantation colonial empire, slavery, and racism. So much for the species. The Wasteocene points to toxicity. If the Anthropocene is planetary, is a planetary disembodied narrative, the Wasteocene, on the other hand, is about communities, bodies, and how a way of producing and consuming transforms everything alive into a gigantic socio-ecological dump. The Wasteocene then is not the age of waste, found everywhere on the planet. It is not a refined academic label, a little bit of a jargon employed to complain about the filth of our cities, nor is it another word to describe the familiar environmentalist nostalgia for some paradise lost in the past. In fact, the Wasteocene is as much about cleanliness and aseptic environment as it is about filth and contamination, because in its true essence, discarding means deciding what has value and what does not have value. But the Wasteocene is not just about toxins, particulates, pesticides. To function, the Wasteocene intoxicates our lives and our stories. the Wasteocene is maintained by a narrative infrastructure that I call a toxic narrative. The Wasteocene toxic narratives silence or normalize the transformation of entire communities into dumps, waste, eventually cemeteries. Toxicity poisons bodies, ecosystems, and communities, but also our stories, our memories, and our imagination. The Wasteocene greatest success is having convinced us that if you are poor, sick, jobless, if you live in a neighborhood where everything is falling apart, well, it must be your fault. It is not a system that produces waste, that makes you waste. Instead, being waste becomes an ontological characteristic, a quality of the person, of the community, of the non-human, etc. Can one detoxify from the Wasteocene? Can we free ourselves from the toxic infrastructure that poisons bodies, histories, communities, relationships? Some even among us, for instance, among environmental humanities scholars, some repeat that we must inhabit toxicity. Philosophers and environmental humanities scholars have taught us that the world we live in, that we ourselves are hybrids, cyborgs. Purity is an illusion, a dream that looks so much like a nightmare, filled as it is with racist references. We must stay in the middle, inside the troubles. There is life in the ruins of capitalism at its extreme edges. This we are told by many and many scholars, those who tell that life is reborn amidst the wreckage of progress. Now, certainly all this is true. Yet, well, I don't know how to explain myself, but there is something that leaves me uncomfortable about this discourse. Maybe because living among the ruins of capitalism is harsh if you are trapped there and not just visiting. Purity does not exist, it is true, but toxicity does. The Wasteocene is based on this founding principle and practice. Someone and something is to be rejected, wasted, and what matters is the separation between who and what is worth, and who and what is worthless. The transformation of the Wasteocene needs a revolution. It will not be a natural evolution from the ruins of capitalism. American writer Rebecca Solnit has written, "To build a fence is to suggest that there is a difference where there is not, so there will be then. And to draw a boundary is roughly the same thing. Paradise means a garden close by a wall. And when Adam and Eve were driven out of Eden, then the wall became visible in the narrative for the first time because it makes sense, especially when seen from the outside." In short, one would say that the wall, the fence, is what makes the garden. For me, what makes the garden is not the natural decay of capitalism, nature taking over the city. Think about what happened with the COVID-19, no, for instance. So it's not the natural decay of capitalism, is not nature taking over the city, but resilient communities fighting against the Wasteocene, tearing down walls, transforming spaces of oppression and toxicity into communal spaces. It is commoning that transforms the socio-ecological dump sites of the Wasteocene into community gardens. Certainly, this is not the garden. Those are not the gardens of gated, sanitized, purified communities, but neither this garden is coming out from the consumption of capitalism. Commoning is the antidote to Wasteocene. Just as Wasteocene produces and reproduces itself through relations of exploitation and consumption, commoning, on the other hand, is made up of relationships of reproduction and care. That kind of garden grows multi-species communities that are not born naturally, organically, because a factory closes. Commoning is a project that goes through the bodies, affections, cares, and loves of humans and non-humans. It is a revolution as if joy mattered, as if militancy were a close relative of friendship, as if we should be happy now, and what is important is not to speak best in public, but to listen best, even those who do not speak in our words, like the plants and the insects in a garden. I have seen garden flourishing. I have seen communities dancing around toxic Wasteocene fires. In Tuzla, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where women and workers, their neighbors and students gathered together around a decommissioned chemical factory, a permanent dispenser of toxicity, and in demanding justice for those who became sick, so remediation, jobs. They also rediscovered that they were a community and founded the Workers' University. I have seen a community dancing around the toxic fire of a cement factory in Can San Juan in Catalonia, where fighting to breathe, a resilient community has reopened a theater, another kind of garden in which to cultivate the seeds of memories and futures free from toxic narratives. I have seen so many gardens come out of the waste of Campania, my region in Italy. I have seen a lake spring up in the ruins of Snia Viscosa in Rome. I discovered the history of Snia Viscosa, of this factory, while watching a music video by the hip-hop group Assalti Frontali, beautifully titled The Fighting Lake. The plant had worked from 1923 to 1954, producing synthetic fiber, rayon, through the use of carbon disulfide, an extremely toxic chemical. After production ceased, the factory remained abandoned for decades until the 1990s and 2000, when it became the target of several projects of speculation and development aimed at turning the industrial area into a shopping mall or a residential complex. As a movement from below began to mobilize to defend the area, occupying part of the buildings for the purpose of housing cultural and political activities, nature also appeared to rise up against the development plan. The story of the Snia Viscosa sheds light on the logic of the Wasteocene and at the same time on its possible alternatives. Recovering what has been discarded, that is putting it back onto work, is one of the possible outcomes of the Wasteocene logic. From the ruins of an abandoned factory may well rise a shopping mall. But this in no way challenges the wasting relationships that have contaminated the workers and their community. What really challenges the logic of the Wasteocene is commoning as a practice, because it creates a different set of relationships based on reproduction and care rather than on exploitation. Just as the Wasteocene manifests itself through the imposition of toxic narratives and the erasure of narratives of resistance, so the struggle against it passes also through the construction of alternative archives, such as those created by the Workers' University in Tuzla and by activists at the former Snia Viscosa in Rome, who have found and recovered old documents, memories reduced to garbage in the abandoned factory. And I am now going to finish. Yes, this is my last slide. There are the tidy, clean, aseptic gardens, those, yes, protected by walls and gates, where life seems well preserved, like frozen food in a refrigerated tub in a department store. And then there are the commons, the spaces stolen from capitalism, taken away from the toxic relationships between people, things, plants, animals, and spirits. It is the commoning relationships that produce and protect the garden. It is not about celebrating toxicity or learning to live with it. What would be revolutionary about learning to live with the oppressive violence of capitalism remains a mystery to me. Nor is it about learning to heal from toxicity as if it were an individual disease or a virus that has caught us. It is about freeing ourselves from the toxic relationships that construct the Wasteocene, that make profits for the few and the destruction of life. It is about sabotaging the toxic narratives that justify and invisibilize the Wasteocene. It is about imagining and practicing commoning against the logic of the Wasteocene. And as scholars, we can help sabotage the toxic narratives that normalize and hide injustice and bring out the resistant memories, the insurgent archives that tell the stories no one else has ever told us. Because commoning, the sociological relationships based on caring and sharing, are never impersonal. They are not like the Anthropocene, something that you read about in books, that the scientist on TV explains to you. Commoning mixes with your body, you breathe it into the air. Often you ingest it at communal dinners with your comrades. Commoning enters in your life, in your kitchen, in the books you write, creating new multi-species communities, of course, for those who are willing to fight. Thank you.
Okay, Gisela, what do you think? Some time for questions, for conversation? That was fantastic.
I
Thank you,
mean,
Marco.
thank you. I mean, it just so much information and so many options and opportunities to think from different perspectives about the Wasteocene and other categories. And that was going to be one of my questions, like how does the Wasteocene dialogues with Plantationocene and any there's so many categories that are kind of proliferating right now, and you named Capitolocene, and obviously it's not the Anthropocene, but there's so many others even more. And I was going to ask you if you feel like there is any other category out there that will have kind of a sustainable conversation with this idea of the Wasteocene. I don't know, there is the Technocene, the Anthropocene, there's so many, and not all of them are as defined as yours. So what's your take on that?
Thank you. Thank you, Giselle. So, well, I think that in the conclusion of my book, I try to make clear, I hope so, that I am trying to avoid to be part of the neoliberal kind of academic agenda. So basically, I need to prove that I came up with my own name so I can sell it on the market of the neoliberal H index and bibliometrics. I think that Capitalocene is a much better concept than mine, so use it. I think that if we are talking about commoning, well, you know, there should be some kind of coherence between what you are preaching and what you are doing. And for me, the Wasteocene is just part of a general, you could say insurrection, or you might say in a less, can I say, in a more polite way, a discussion around the Anthropocene. However, in the book, I also say that I am not precisely against the Anthropocene. So my book is not the kind of polemic book trying to prove that those who have been using the Anthropocene are, I don't know, blind towards race, class, gender, historical inequalities, and so on and so forth. Absolutely not. I always mention one example, Laura Pulido, a dear friend of mine and a very crucial figure in environmental justice. She wrote a chapter in a book that I have co-edited with Greg Mitman and Rob Emmett, sorry. And the title of Laura's chapter is Race in the Wasteocene. Well, would you say that Laura is not aware of, racism in racial capitalism? Oh my God. I mean, I am laughing just thinking that somebody can even think about something like that. So in a sense, it's not so much a matter of label, but it's a matter of the narrative that we are trying to deliver. If the Anthropocene is a good key for you to do that, let's use the Anthropocene and talk about race in the Anthropocene. If Capitalocene is a good key, use it. If Wasteocene can help, sure, but I don't want to try to sell the product, especially because that product will not be there without, the work of Jason Moore, the work of Stefania Bark, of Laura Pulido, but also people like Will Stephan. Will Stephan died not long ago. He was an Earth system scientist. He was using he was one of the protagonists of the Anthropocene debate. Well, he was also working with me in Berlin and the Anthropocene campus in a workshop with the title Filtering the Anthropocene, which was all about race, class, justice, injustice, and gender in the Anthropocene. So again, I am not building my own straw man for the sake of getting some click. What I am against is actually, erasing injustice, erasing gender, class, and race differences. If you do that, well, you will find me on the barricades. But then I am not asking people to think precisely as I do to be on the same barricades, right? We can fight together even if you are using a different concept. And anyway, yes, there are a lot of other terms. You might say there is a proliferation, maybe an inflation even. Some are very creative. I think that, there is something, I think it's called you mentioned this, the main Anthropocene, right? I think that Giovanna Di Chiro used it, if I am not mistaken. So I think it's very well done. I like also somebody has been talking about the Anglo scene, and it's completely true, no? Absolutely true. Or the Growthocene. The Growthocene is also very interesting. Many people in the degrowth community, many people are talking about this, and it's an interesting key again. But I mean, I don't know if I was able to explain myself well, but for me, it's more interesting the door that we are opening open rather than just the key. Use what could help you to open the door.
Marco, if I might follow up, some of what's so interesting is this proliferation, right? And it is absolutely about a kind of neoliberal academy. In part, it's also about, it's funny, it's an exercise I teach often our core environmental studies class, which is very across disciplines, actually mostly natural sciences and engineers, and trying to talk about why the naming matters. We often talk about something that you've gotten at here, right, of course, which is causality, like who or what is to blame for, right, is often the formulation. And many of those different scenes come out of that question of causality. As you were talking, I was thinking differently, and I really very much enjoyed the Wasteocene. It was very provocative to read, since I'm very interested in those questions, especially in the era I work in, which is about 500 years ago, when many things are emerging, like ideas around the commons. But what I was thinking is that, okay, Wasteocene is partly a kind of a dirty Anthropocene, right? And I was thinking a bit about that it actually maybe gets at not just causality, and it could be causality too, sure, but it actually gets at a kind of, I'm not sure what word to use, a kind of tone or attunement, another dimension of these conversations that we're having that aren't just about who or what is to blame. Again, a question to be asked and to attempt to answer, but the kind of, it has to do with a certain kind of quality, a kind of experiential kind of life quality. That's not exactly a question, but I found it very intriguing and worth thinking about, which is one of those other aspects of this moment we're trying to name that are worth paying attention to.
Thank you. Thank you, Joseph. I agree with you that naming is a very powerful exercise. And the naming can also be very powerful in terms of silencing, of normalizing, naturalizing, and so on and so forth. So absolutely. And I do believe, I have written this in my book, in a few articles, that the Anthropocene might have this function when we say that, we, the humans, are responsible of this planetary mess. It's a little bit funny that, doesn't matter if you are from Mozambique or from Toronto, we are all in this together. It's also a little bit like the metaphor of the Titanic that I have used a couple of times. And, since I am an historian, I don't want to be, picky, but if you use the Titanic as a metaphor, well, it's worth remembering that 25% of the people in the third class survived, so 75 died. So cluster matters in this planetary socio-ecological crisis. So I think that it's important. I agree with you that Capitalocene, for instance, has a very strong Capitalocene speaks especially about I would say, the causes of the socio-ecological crisis. So capitalism as the main, cause of the socio-ecological crisis if you look at it through the Capitalocene narrative and interpretation. The Wasteocene, even if the Wasteocene is absolutely connected, as I acknowledge in the book, to the Capitalocene, it's true that I try to look more at the effects, if you wish, rather than the causes of the socio-ecological crisis. And I am trying to argue that these effects are actually, as you said, embodied into the lives, into the stories, into the bodies, precisely, of human and non-humans. The other thing maybe that I could add, trying to, to be in conversation with what you said, is also that the Wasteocene as potentially the Wasteocene could also serve people, scholars, people who are colleagues, who are a little bit more skeptical about the centrality of capitalism. So many people told me that, for instance, Wasteocene can be applied also to the so-called, socialist countries. This is, I think this could also be a possibility. And the other thing maybe that it's interesting for me is that with the Wasteocene, and I hope also with my talk today, with my chat with all of you today, I do believe that there is something connected with the personal in the Wasteocene. So maybe the Capitalocene is still a little bit impersonal, while with what I am trying to make with the Wasteocene is also this idea that it passes through your life, your bodies, your memories. And maybe, I don't know if this could be something that somebody else will use it and do something with it.
I want to add on to that, or start moving towards my question with that. But part of what was so exciting for me as a term, the idea of waste, is not to try to sell the idea of the Wasteocene too hard here, but I love that it can be both a noun and a verb, which I don't think is common of many of these other terms. And it moves it into a kind of active state, which is a little thinking out of theater, but when we think of the embodied, it's about action, right? And so there's a kind of accountability that you're really drawing us to from a historical lens, and in thinking about toxic narratives as you turn them, and thinking about what gets neglected. And this, I love this quote, I do believe the main role of historians is not simply remembering the past, but rather organizing the collective memory, something which implies forgetting as much as remembering, and bringing in those longer, conversations. I was thinking a lot about Benjamin as you were talking earlier, and some of those kind of legacies that he thinks about with extraction and excavation of memory. All to say, I would love to hear more about the idea of commoning within history. What does that mean? As historians, what does commoning look like to us? What is our role in commoning as we think through collective memories, as we try to combat these toxic narratives? What are steps that we should be thinking in our own framings of collective memory?
Thank you, Weston. I am thinking sometimes with the digital, events, that when the questions are too difficult, sometimes I am thinking I should start pretending that my connection is not working. So, start, making noise and so on and so forth, so I can escape from the very difficult questions and, blame global
We need
capitalism.
an app that creates static or something right on the
Exactly.
screen, right?
Yeah, I could try, right? Commoning, but I will not. I will not. I try to be a good guy. No, okay, Weston. So first of all, I thank you first of all for what you said about the Wasteocene. I think that for me the biggest, gift is when people are able to find things in what you have written and sometimes help you to think better about you have been trying to say. I think it's always the best that can happen to us. Commoning, well, so first of all, I believe that an important part of the story, if you wish, is to be able to recognize the toxic narrative infrastructure, because what is interesting is that we are able to see waste everywhere, right? I don't know about your own city, what you mean, but even here in Barcelona, in Naples, of course, in many other, maybe in New York City, but you see a lot of waste around you, right? However, what you are not able to see, I believe, are the wasting relationships organizing this waste, right? And you don't see it, not because you are distracted or because you are stupid, not well educated or whatever, but because there is a toxic infrastructure that silence, invisibilize, and naturalize this. So the first thing for me is, especially as a teacher, if you wish, is to teach the students to be able to detect the toxic infrastructure that they are traversing every day. So for instance, with my students, I do an exercise. I don't know if it makes sense to share this with you now, but I do this exercise. So I ask them to basically to have a diary for more or less a couple of months, or at least 1 month. And the diary is especially, from home to the university and back. And basically try to detect the toxic narratives around them. It can be a statue, it can be a monument, it can be the how do you say, the toponyms, hopefully in English. My God, my pronunciation is collapsing. The names of the streets in the city, and so, and maybe it can be the advertisement, the books that you are reading in this university, right? So first of all, detect the toxic narrative, to be able to detect them, and then build counter-hegemonic storytelling, because our cities, for instance, are peopled by ghosts that we are not able to see anymore, right? It's the ghosts of the people who have fought against the wasting relationships. There are a lot of stories embedded in the place that we traverse, that we live in, and we pass by, that we don't know anything about it. And I am again stealing a little bit here from Laura Pulido, Baraclough, and Cheng, the People's Guide to Los Angeles, not when they say Los Angeles people of ghosts of the past stories and so on. So this is one thing. And then the other thing that I truly believe about, well, historically, we have been talking a lot about commons. So commons as common property versus private property, and sometimes also versus other kind of property, for instance, state property, right? So commons is a different set of property relationships. And I am now thinking, of course, of the mothership of all. I cannot be, I should try not to say anything vulgar here. The mothership of all the strange narratives about commons. I am talking about Gareth Hardin, The Tragedy of the Commons, in which he was, he was simply wrong. He was thinking about open access, and he thought that he was talking about a medieval commons, something that probably a student of mine wouldn't pass the test at the end of the course. Anyway, so this kind, so the commons as a different form of ownership, a different way of owning. However, if it's true that waste is a verb and a noun, and this is what it's really important for me that it's not waste, but it's wasting relationships. I am trying to escape the reification of the commons, talking about commoning. So for me, what is relevant here is not only the commons as a thing, but the socio-ecological relationships which produce commons, produce and reproduce commons. And these socio-ecological relationships are based on caring and sharing. And this is precisely the antidote of the wasting relationship, which are instead based on extracting and othering. So in this sense, as a historian and scholars in general, I think that our job is again to try to recover the ghost stories of commoning, that, you know, if they are, if somebody, you know, fought for something and lost, the struggle doesn't mean that the struggle didn't exist, right? There is no need. I mean, if those struggles had been erased, it's because they were, you know, capitalism was so afraid, the elite were so afraid of the possibilities that they couldn't even contemplate them. So you need to erase even the possibility of alternative. You know, it's the Thatcher revolution. There is no alternative, right? And I believe that this is very powerful. So to recover these stories and to maybe to shift a little bit from the thing to the process. Because why it's so important to shift from the thing to the process? Well, I think it's important because it's also giving us a possibility to shift from a very defensive and a little bit depressing, I think, approach. Let's try to save a few commons that have been left since the big enclosure, right? There are a few left, let's try to defend them. Or we can say, you know what, actually we are creating new commons now through our commoning socio-ecological relationships, and we are creating and fabricating new commons. We are actually stealing back or taking back, maybe better, what has been already enclosed and expropriated from us. And the commoning is interesting because it's not about the thing per se, but it's about the kind of institutions that we are creating. Tony Negri and Michael Hart spoke about this in a fantastic book, Assembly, in which they think precisely about the assembly as a constituent power of a new socio-ecological relationship. Well, this is also Raymond Williams, isn't it? When Raymond Williams said we need new stories because we need new relationships, right? So this is maybe what I would say a bit in a confused way about what you asked. But indeed, I mean, and you know, commoning is also powerful because it also challenged the idea of success and failure. So I mentioned in the book and today in my talk the case of Can San Joan in Catalonia, near to Barcelona. So this is a community, it's a working class community with this cement factory really oppressing the community with pollution, contamination. They have been fighting against this and they failed. So the factory is still there. So it's a story of failure, right? Well, I don't know, because they open a theater, they have a festival of poetry, they have actually a soccer team, and the factory tried to sponsor the soccer team, not to give money to a working class work community. And they said, you know, well, I cannot say what they said because it's not something that you say in a nice academic, but basically they told them that they didn't need the money in another way. So I believe that this is also a challenge to the idea of failure and success. Is it a story of success or failure? Well, if you are building a new community, which is not a wasted community anymore, well, it's a story of success, even if the pollution is still there.
Thank you. I have a quick question. Marco, this is so amazing. And I really like the idea that you mentioned about sabotage, the toxic narratives, and how to bring resistance, and the idea of insurgent archives. I think is a beautiful idea to kind of collect those forgotten stories or those stories that remain in the margins or having silence. And because, as you said, right, naming is powerful, but it's also powerful to silence. But I'm wondering what happened when the Wasteocene becomes the norm? When the Wasteocene goes across these toxic regimes and it's embodied not just based on class or different hierarchies, but I'm thinking about Latin America, for instance, where just think about Mexico, the capital. The Wasteocene is everywhere. Even if people would acknowledge it or not, is transversal. It goes across classes because there has not been a planned, clean mapping of how to create sacrifice zones next to certain communities and not like in the States, for instance, that has been already kind of proven that there has been a lot of planning in terms of where to create these toxic sinks. But in other places where it's more chaotic, it has not happened like that. And the Wasteocene is everywhere, and it goes across class, across race, across ethnicity. So how do you think about this? If in terms of being just one aspect of the social ecological crisis that we are experiencing, it becomes the main aspect, and it's a main aspect that traverses across everything.
Yes, thank you. To tell you the truth, maybe you don't need to go to Mexico City. I'm thinking about my hometown, which is Naples in southern Italy. And sometimes I have been struggling with this because sometimes Naples is in such a situation in which I am wondering, should we speak about environmental injustice here when, sometimes also in the rich, let's put in this way, middle class, upper class neighborhoods, you are, more or less overwhelmed with garbage. And, you might say something similar to regarding Rome and so on and so forth. And you are completely right that in many countries in Latin America, but also in Africa, I know in India, the situation is a little bit like that. Well, to tell you the truth, I think that we need, how can I say this? Well, let's put in this way. I am a little bit, I am sticking with the class, gender, and race, even in this situation. So for instance, of course, I don't know so much about Latin America. So Giselle, you should probably answer better than me this question. But let's say that, I have been in Rio de Janeiro many times with my, colleagues for several projects in Florianopolis and in San Salvador, for instance. Well, I completely agree. And I lived in Naples for most of my life, maybe. So I agree with you that the Wasteocene can be overwhelming and can almost questioning, the main argument, because it's really everywhere. But maybe one question that we can ask ourselves, if we, the privileged, are in this situation, what is happening to the people who are not privileged? So, and I have said this in a similar way about the COVID-19. I got very sick really at the very beginning of the pandemic, at the beginning of March 2020. However, I don't buy the idea that the pandemic was some kind of, it was an experience which was going beyond, class, race, or geographical differences, and so on and so forth. I was dying. I can tell you, I was dying. It was really bad. I am still struggling when I think about this. However, I was a more or less white university professor living in Sweden. So, if COVID has been attacking everyone, so including me, well, I can still think about what would happen to somebody in Morro da Babilonia, in a favelas, in Brazil, in Flammable, in Buenos Aires, or in Agloboshi, in Ghana. So I think that your point is absolutely right. And the Wasteocene, and it's a little bit like climate change. I mean, we can say that climate in the long run, I mean, there is a point in saying that we are all on the same boat. No, there is a point. It's true. I mean, even if some very, very rich billionaire, I think that they are really thinking about going somewhere out there in the space. And I don't know if you have seen the movie Don't Look Up. No, I mean, I don't want to spoil anything, but it gives this impression. But anyway, it's science fiction, sorry. So we are all in the same boat, more or less. Maybe we are all in the same boat. But it's also true what other people have been saying, that we will have also a very strong climate apartheid. So precisely because we are, if you think about Latin America, Gisela, I don't know if you agree, you know, please correct me. You are really the expert. But my impression is that, you know, in many big cities in Latin America, precisely because the situation is also so, you could say, complicated, you might say overwhelming, you have an explosion of gated communities, of people trying to create some kind of, you know, rich apartheid. So you might still work somehow with the Wasteocene, keeping alive the idea that inequalities still matter. But I completely agree. I think it's a good reflection. It's something that we should think. Just, I am wondering if inequalities is actually aggravating, you know, climate apartheid or waste apartheid or so on and so forth. But again, I might be completely wrong.
I just want to say that it takes us back to this idea of purity doesn't exist. And you can create walls and you can create gated communities, but there is something even beyond that in the Wasteocene, that is what you eat. So even if you eat, like now it has been discovered, chocolate, you have lead. And even if you have microplastics in your organisms, in your blood, no matter if you buy in the organic store or if you buy in the regular store, of course there are levels and there is inequality. I will not ever dispute that. But my question is, there is no, in my impression, and maybe I'm wrong, but there is no way out of the Wasteocene.
Yeah, you're right. You're right that it's precisely, it's a planetary crisis. So in the end, you are completely right that it's an illusion. The purity, the building of gated community, the climate apartheid. I do believe that it might work for a while. I think that the situation will be much worse in the future. And I am a big fan of science fiction and climate fiction. And I have been, you know, especially because I was very sick and I wrote the book while I was more or less trying to get back on my feet. I was watching a lot of TV series, which in the end, I decided to do something useful out of this time. And, you know, if you think about a lot of those climate fiction, like 3%, no, Giselle, which is a Brazilian TV series. So you have really this idea that there will be, and I think it's already here, some kind of climate apartheid, of, you know, purity apartheid. And absolutely, you are completely right that in the long run, it will not work. But, you know, in the middle, maybe, you know, I do believe that rich will live better and longer in the middle, while waiting for the, you know, the apocalypse or maybe the big exodus to another planet. But this is my impression, because the point I don't know, maybe I can tell you something that happened to me. Once I was in a workshop, in an environmental humanities workshop. I was presenting my, you know, project Toxic Bios, Toxic Autobiographies, and a colleague was, you know, very critical of my presentation. Terrible. Ma, never. No, she had the point, of course, but she was very critical, and she said that I had a very primitive, very, kind of naive interpretation of purity and toxicity, because of course everything is toxic at this point on the planet. And I mean, I do believe that she had a good point. However, she was an academic university professor living in a big European city. And when I asked her, okay, so would you, exchange for 1 year? I can bring a family from Moro da Babilonia to your place and you go there. If everything is the same, we are all in this mess and so on. Why you don't want your kids to drink the water of Moro da Babilonia? So I believe that, academically speaking, it's a very good point. We need to understand that there is no purity. We need to understand that there is also a little bit of kind of, racist imaginary about purity. On the other hand, we need also to defend the struggles of people who wanted clean water. Because if we say, but water is, no, water is never clean. What are you saying? Well, why you don't want to drink for your kids the water from Moro da Babilonia? We can do this. I actually was really going to organize the exchange. I could, but she didn't want to. So I think that we need to think about this and find a way to keep thinking about the global, as you said, and also very cross-cutting, class, gender, cross-cutting, and also, how can I say, saving the struggle for justice, social ecological justice.
I know we're getting towards the end of our time, but something you just said, Marco, really made me think about how the Wasteocene offers a level of nuance that's really important. And I know it's something that you think about in other contexts as well. It's not as simple as to say the local and the global, and it's how you get from one to the other, or you don't access all of the global or the planetary all at the same time, right? Even if you're following waste of various kinds, whether it's toxicity or discard, there are particular routes, right? So, okay, press a plastic bottle here, yes, it connects you to a few other places, but it doesn't connect you to everything all at once, right? In a way, so I appreciate how this account also allows for greater nuance about those moments of interconnection, but also moments of disconnection. And the various processes around waste, again, everything from the thing to wasting away to operations around people and toxicity, they all offer different ways of trying to get a more nuanced portrait of when we are connected, whoever that we is, when we're not, right? When we may be all in the boat together, but there are very different parts of the boat, and some people are trying to build their own yachts outside of it, right? It gives us a more nuanced sense of those particularities.
Yes, I see the people building their own yacht somewhere. No, but I agree. I think that Gisela is asking us to think about the Wasteocene as a global tale, and I think it's in a sense it's depressing. It's the depressing part of the project, maybe in a sense. But on the other hand, I hope that we can also try to recover the stories of resistance, the little spaces in which people have been trying to live in a different ways and in different relationships. Somebody told me, somebody, a friend and a colleague told me that he really cannot see the possibility to save the world from the Wasteocene, from the kind of stories that I've been telling in the book and also today in this talk. So, a lake in Rome, or an experience in Tuzla, or a small working class village close to Barcelona, well, the Wasteocene cannot be sabotaged by this. I mean, I don't know. My answer is, first of all, not by those four, by thousands and thousands of them maybe. And by the way, I know it's a little bit naive, and you will forgive me for this, but even if, let's say for a moment, let's say that I'm wrong, and actually, we are not able to sabotage, to change the Wasteocene radically. Well, if we are, again, not vulgar, if we are unable to escape the situation, isn't it at least better to live in a community made of caring and sharing rather than in a community made of extraction and othering? Isn't it better to have dinner with all neighbors in a working class neighborhood in Tuzla rather than watching television in your dining room? Isn't it better to have to make a theater back in your working class community rather than, you know, just be sick with the pollution coming from the factory? So even if, let's say that actually I am wrong and these things will not change the Wasteocene, well, at least we will be able to live through the Wasteocene a little bit better. So I don't know. It's a little bit a minimalistic project. Maybe I am still thinking that the revolution is there and is happening. And maybe it's better not to talk too much about it because, you know, revolution, they don't want to be announced. It's better if they arrive like ghosts.
I want to say just thank you, and I couldn't agree more with you. I like to kind of I like to push the idea a little bit farther, but I do also agree with the nuances, and it's not across the board the same. So, and I also think that what you're talking about is this commoning may create the conditions for a less Wasteocene condition, even in a tiny community. So that's a beginning, and that's a way of kind of creating, just by itself, a way of sabotaging it. So I think we are running out of time.
Yes, indeed. I want to sort of thank Professor Armicro. Marco, it's been wonderful to talk with you about your fantastic book, and I have so many other questions, but but time is time, and this is where we are. I want to thank Gisela again for all that she builds in the Center for Environmental Studies, but also in particular for arranging this really important conversation. And thanks to Weston also for being part of this and for working behind the scenes very often to make sure everything we do comes out well, which it does, thanks to him. So goodbye from Rice University and from Planet Now, and we will see you again in the future.